Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at art and tragedy, some really fascinating stuff you all have sent over, especially Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy. It's a book that tackles some, well, huge questions, like what did tragedy actually mean to the ancient Greeks? And what about these powerful forces, Apollo and Dionysus? Oh, and this wild idea that the way we think now, thanks to Socrates, might have actually, killed tragedy.
It's true. I mean, Nietzsche really shakes things up with this book. It's funny, though, because years later, like 16 years, he actually called it an impossible book, right? Poorly
Right.
written. He even used the word saccharine to describe it. But then he also admitted that it made some serious waves, especially among
So
artists.
there's definitely something powerful going on in the birth of tragedy, even if Nietzsche himself had some second thoughts. And today, that's what we're diving into. We're going to unpack those ideas like Apollo and Dionysus, tragedy and Socratic thought, and see if they still resonate with us today. All right, so let's jump right into the birth of tragedy. Nietzsche lays out this conflict, right? This big conflict between two forces, the Apollonian and the Dionysian. Now, for someone who's never come across these ideas before, how would you explain them, like in simple terms?
Well, think about it like this. Imagine you're looking at like a really beautiful painting or listening to this calming piece of music, right? You get this feeling of order, clarity, and harmony. That's Apollo, the Apollonian principle, in action. It's all about seeking beauty, balance, becoming an individual. It gives us structure, it gives us form.
Okay, so it's about finding that peace and beauty in the world, like in those things, a painting or music. And it makes sense then why Nietzsche links it to visual art, even dreams. They all create that order and separation from, the chaos of life.
Exactly. Now, on the other hand, think about when you're completely lost in music, right? Like at a concert or even just listening to your favorite song on repeat. You lose yourself in the rhythm, you feel connected to everyone around you. You even kind of like let go of yourself as an individual and become part of something bigger. That's the Dionysian principle. It's about embracing the chaos, the primal urges, that sense of unity, even intoxication, like being swept away by something so much bigger than yourself.
I get that. It's that raw energy, that passion we find in music or in those ecstatic experiences, right? Like being part of a crowd at a concert. It's powerful, a little, maybe even a little primal, yeah.
Right. And Nietzsche saw these two forces, Apollo and Dionysus, as like the keys, the fundamental keys to understanding not just art, but like all of ancient Greek culture.
So how did these two, well, seemingly opposite forces actually play out in ancient Greece? How did it actually work?
Well, okay, think about the Olympian gods, right? They're beautiful, they're powerful, but also kind of detached. Nietzsche's argument is that this Apollonian beauty, it had a purpose. It masked the terror of existence. It let the Greeks create this whole world of order and beauty, kind of like a buffer against the chaos and the suffering that's just part of life.
So the gods represented this Apollonian ideal, almost like a beautiful illusion to deal with the harsh stuff in life.
Exactly. And then you have tragedy, which, Nietzsche says comes from the Dionysian side of things. He saw it emerging from the chorus, like in Greek theater,
Yeah.
all those ecstatic chants and dances, letting the Greeks tap into these primal energies. It's fascinating. The art form we link with suffering, with those difficult emotions, well, it came from this raw, almost frenzied energy.
It really makes you think about music, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
how it connects us to those deeper, sometimes darker emotions. You know what I mean?
Totally. And to get it even more, we can look at the satyrs, right? These half-man, half-goat creatures. They're super connected to Dionysus. They represent the unbridled stuff, the primal aspects of human nature, all those instincts and urges that society always tries to control.
So they're kind of a symbol of honesty, this
Yeah.
raw and unfiltered expression of our animal nature, the part of us we try to hide, to repress.
Right. But in Greek culture, they were allowed to exist, to express those truths.
So we have this dynamic between the Apollonian and the Dionysian playing out everywhere in Greek art and culture. But then Nietzsche throws this curveball, right? He brings in Socrates. And he makes this wild claim that Socrates, with his logic and reason, actually caused the death of tragedy.
That's definitely one of the most controversial things he says in the book. It's, a lot of debate around that. Basically, Nietzsche's saying that Socrates shifted everything away from emotion, from myth, from intuition, and towards the rationale, towards ethics. He made reason and logic the most important things and pushed people to question, to analyze, and to seek knowledge through rational discourse.
So while reason and logic are obviously important, Nietzsche is kind of suggesting that this shift, it came with a cost. But how did this focus on the rational kill tragedy exactly? How does that even work?
Well, you have to think about what tragedy is, right? At its core, it grapples with these primal emotions, with fate and suffering, with things we can't always explain, can't understand rationally. It forces us to confront those experiences that just overwhelm us, and leave us questioning, like, the meaning of life, what is justice, our place in the universe.
It's not about finding these neat, tidy solutions, right? It's about wrestling with those huge, messy questions that don't always have easy answers.
Right. But Socratic thought, with all its emphasis on reason, it tried to bring order and clarity to those chaotic experiences. It tried to explain it all, to understand it through logic and argument. And that, according to Nietzsche, that's what robbed tragedy of its power.
Almost like instead of just letting ourselves feel those big, uncomfortable feelings, we started, picking them apart, trying to explain them away with logic.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And you can actually see this shift, like in the real world, in the works of Euripides, one of the later Greek tragedians. His plays are full of characters who are debating, who are reasoning, trying to make sense of their suffering through these intellectual arguments, instead of just, embodying their tragic fates.
So by trying to rationalize everything, by trying to analyze it all, are we losing something important about what it means to be human?
That's what Nietzsche seems to think, yeah. And he argues that this has had a lasting impact, and not just on art, on like our entire culture. He sees this theoretical man who's, completely driven by the need for knowledge as well as dominant even today.
It's interesting because we can see that playing out right now. We're bombarded with information. There's all this pressure to be well informed, to have opinion on everything. But sometimes, it feels like we're losing touch with something deeper, something beyond just the facts and the analysis.
It's true. And, Nietzsche was really wary of what he called the theoretical man, this person who's so consumed by like knowledge and explanation that they lose sight of those intuitive and emotional experiences that, well, they connect us to something beyond ourselves. He worried that we'd become like obsessed with information, with dissecting everything with reason and leave no room for those less rational but equally important parts of being human.
And that brings us to music.
Yeah.
Nietzsche saw music as unique, like uniquely able to express the Dionysian directly. It bypasses reason, bypasses logic to tap into something deeper. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I think there's a lot of truth to that. Just think about how music affects you, right? I mean, it can bring up these powerful emotions, a feeling of unity, even like transport you to another place, to another experience. And it does all of that without needing words, images, or logical arguments. Music speaks to our feelings, to our instincts, to those primal parts of ourselves that exist beyond like language and reason.
I totally agree. There are definitely times when like words just can't express what music can. It's
Yeah.
like it unlocks a different kind of understanding, something that resonates deep down.
Exactly. And for Nietzsche, that was proof of music's power, of its unique power. He thought music was the foundation of the tragic myth, what gave it that metaphysical depth. It's almost as if music provides this like emotional and spiritual bedrock that the whole story of tragedy is built on.
So if we're following this, then music, this raw, primal force connected to Dionysus, that's what gives the emotional depth. And the Apollonian, it comes in and shapes it, gives it structure through like the narrative, the images, all the elements of storytelling.
Yeah, yeah. It is this fascinating back and forth between them. The Dionysian gives you that emotional and spiritual rawness, that intensity of feeling. And the Apollonian, it helps us make sense of it, to contain it within a form we can actually grasp.
Okay, this is starting to make a lot of sense. But where does this leave us today? I mean, what does his critique of Socratism even mean for us? Like now, living in the modern world, what does it all mean?
That's the big question, isn't it? The million-dollar question. And Nietzsche doesn't give us, he doesn't give us any easy answers. He's not saying we should like just ditch reason or logic altogether. I mean, those are essential tools for living, for understanding the world. But he is pushing us to be aware of the potential downsides of focusing too much on the rational. He's warning us about losing myth.
Thank you.
Losing that intuitive connection to something beyond ourselves, and how that might limit our experience of art, of life itself.
So what are we supposed to do with that? How do we even begin to find that balance? Where do we even start?
I think it starts with just being aware of these tensions, these opposing forces, right, in ourselves and in our culture. We need to be conscious of how our our pursuit of knowledge, our need to explain and analyze everything, it might actually be blocking us from experiencing the world in other ways that are just as valid, just as important.
So it's not about choosing sides. It's about recognizing the value of both the Apollonian and the Dionysian, of finding a way to integrate them into our lives.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're not just, thinking machines, we're also feeling, sensing beings. We need reason and logic to build societies, to understand the world around us, but we also need intuition, emotion, that connection to something bigger, to really live, to experience, all of what it means to be human.
It's like I'm remembering that Nietzsche talks about how Socrates himself composed music in prison. Like at the end of his life, even this champion of reason, he recognized that there was something more, something that logic just couldn't grasp.
It's a fascinating detail, right? Nietzsche calls this the music-making Socrates, and he sees it as this glimmer of hope. Maybe it's a sign that even the most hardcore logician can see the limits of reason, can see the need for something more. It could point to a future where art and reason can exist together,
Yeah.
where we can embrace both the Apollonian and the Dionysian, without having to sacrifice one for the other.
It makes you wonder if by striving for that balance, maybe we could actually like rediscover something of the power of tragedy, of art itself, in our modern world.
It's a possibility, right? Definitely worth exploring. And it ties back to myth, to how important myth is in our lives. Nietzsche thought that losing myth, losing these shared stories that connect us to something bigger than ourselves, had this huge impact on our culture. He felt that in a world that's dominated by scientific understanding, we risk losing sight of those deeper truths that art and myth can reveal to us,
It makes you think about what art even means in our lives, doesn't it? In a world that's so full of information and analysis, do we even have the ability to be moved by art anymore? To let ourselves feel those primal emotions that connect us to something bigger?
That's a question we should all be asking ourselves, I think. Maybe by going back to these old ideas, by exploring this tension between the Apollonian and the Dionysian, we can rediscover the power of art, the power it has to shake us out of, our intellectual complacency, and to reconnect us to the deeper mysteries of being alive, of existing.
It really does feel like we're like living in this time where that Apollonian drive, for knowledge, for explanation, it's dominant. Everywhere you look, it's data, it's analysis, it's breaking news. It's almost like overwhelming, exhausting even.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it takes us back to like the core of what Nietzsche's saying, his critique. He wasn't like against knowledge or reason. I mean, he saw them as tools, right? Essential tools for understanding the world. But he was worried about what happens when those become like the only way we look at life, the only lens.
So it all comes back to balance then,
right?
Like embracing both the Apollonian and the Dionysian. But how do we actually do that? I mean, like practically, how do we take these ideas and bring them down from, the philosophy clouds and into our everyday lives?
Well, I think, like we've been talking about, it starts with awareness. Paying attention to how you experience the world. Like when you come across art, music, even those moments of really intense emotion, whether it's joy or sorrow or awe, do you immediately try to like explain it away, to dissect it with logic, or are you letting yourself just feel it, to be present in that experience without judging it?
It's about being more mindful,
right?
More in tune with those things, those deeper currents, the stuff that's underneath the surface of our lives, the stuff that logic just can't fully grasp. It makes me think about how different it is to experience music compared to like reading a news report or something.
Exactly. With music, we let ourselves be swept away by it, by the emotion, the rhythm, the energy of it. It taps into something primal, something that goes beyond our need to explain and analyze. And maybe that's a hint, right? A clue to how we can start to bring the Dionysian back into our lives. It's about finding those spaces, those moments where we can let go of that need to control everything, to understand everything, where we can just be present in the experience and whatever it is.
So it's about finding that balance, right? Between our need for order and our ability to just surrender. We need the Apollonian to give our lives structure, to make sense of the world around us, but we also need that Dionysian side to connect us to something bigger than ourselves,
Yeah.
to really experience like the fullness of being human.
That's a great way to put it. And I think that's the real brilliance of The Birth of Tragedy. You know, it's not just a book about ancient Greek art. It's a book about what it means to be alive, to wrestle with the beauty and the terror of existing. It's a challenge to look at our own assumptions, to find that delicate balance between the Apollonian and Dionysian within ourselves.
It's a reminder that we're not just thinking machines. We're also feeling, sensing beings.
Yeah.
And all of those parts of us, they deserve space to exist.
Exactly. And maybe, like Nietzsche suggested, maybe it's in that space where art and reason come together, where Apollo and Dionysus they dance together, that something truly transformative can happen, can be born.
That's a beautiful thought and a challenging one. It's about embracing both the light and the shadow, the order and the chaos, the beauty and the terror of it all,
Yeah.
of being alive.
Yes, exactly. And maybe, like Nietzsche thought, maybe it's in that space, you know, where art and reason meet, where Apollo and Dionysus are dancing together, that something truly new, truly meaningful, something that resonates with that Dionysian energy can be born, something that speaks to the very soul of what it means to be human.
Well, on that note, any final thoughts for our listeners as they keep thinking about these ideas?
I think the most important thing is to remember that Nietzsche wasn't saying to pick one side or the other. You know, he wasn't saying to ditch reason or logic altogether. Those are still important. They're tools for navigating the world. But he was really pushing us to be aware of what can happen when we rely too much on the rationale, to the point where we shut out other ways of knowing, of experiencing. It's about finding a way to bring all these different parts of ourselves together, to embrace, you know, all of life with all its contradictions and complexities.
It's a beautiful idea and a challenging one. It's about embracing the light and the shadow, the order and the chaos, the beauty and the terror of existence.
Exactly. And perhaps, just like Nietzsche said, it's in that space where art and reason can meet, where Apollo and Dionysus can dance together, that something truly, truly transformative can be born.
And for you, the listener, we'll leave you with these words from Nietzsche himself. Have I always labeled unintelligible things I could not understand? Perhaps there is a kingdom of wisdom which is forbidden to the logician. Perhaps art is even a necessary correlative and supplement to scientific understanding. Think about those words, and until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.